Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy, know y'all with me, let's get it, baby, Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy, know you with me, let's get it.
We road tripping here on the Rockin' Royal Soccer Show. As always, I'm your host, Sean Walker, joined by my esteemed colleague, ESPN Plus women's soccer analyst and former BYU women's soccer star Carla Swensen-Haslam, in the middle of the Cougars' 3-game road trip that started last Friday in Tucson, Arizona, with a 2-1 loss to the Arizona Wildcats. That gave BYU a split with the Arizona schools on the year. We're going to get into that and break it down, as well as talk a little bit about the rest of this road trip coming up as the Cougars hit the final stretch run of the season. But Carla, thanks as always for joining me. How you living?
Thanks. I'm doing well. It's been a bit since we last chatted, just because things I know have been so busy for both of us. And I know things have been busy for the BYU women's soccer team too. They've played multiple games since we last chatted. So there's been a lot of soccer going on and a lot of things to break down.
Yeah, it feels, Carla, like this team was kind of finally, I shouldn't say finally, because I think they did some of this beforehand, but they were starting to really find their footing a little bit in Big 12 play, coming off of 3 straight results. I know we talked a little bit after that 2-2 draw with Oklahoma State. That was maybe a little bit disappointing or disheartening just because it was at home on Southfield. The atmosphere was awesome, but Oklahoma State's a good side, and I think at the end of the day, it's not the worst result in the world, especially when paired with wins over the University of Utah and then getting back on track with the 3-1 win over Iowa State. But that trip to Arizona, I mean, can we call it anything but a setback? It feels like a little bit of a setback for where this team was, perhaps. And I think for the most part, it was just kind of a setback in finishing. Like, this team sort of went back to the start of the season where they had a lot of chances and they just couldn't put them away, right?
Yeah, no, I think you said it perfectly. I think the team, played well, but you're right. The issue that they had at the beginning of the season was goal scoring and just getting a high number of shots. Even at the beginning of the season, their goal scoring percentage was actually pretty good, but they were getting so few shots that it was still, entering at zeros or one a game. And so we see that exact same problem happening against Arizona, against the Wildcats, in that, first of all, the Wildcats defense, I think, did hold BYU pretty well. They played a pretty high line. They forced BYU to have to play in their own half. So you give them credit for that. But I think BYU just has a hard time of getting a high volume of shots. And I don't know if, well, there's probably a few things. I don't know if there's one particular thing that leads to that, but I think a lot of it is that they just don't get inside the box a lot. So you don't get a ton of shots. And that means midfielders are having to take shots from outside of the box. And any good Division One goalkeeper is usually going to read that. And so it really comes just down to not having a high volume of attacking opportunities.
I'm glad you mentioned just sort of the ability to crash the box, because I think you're totally right in there. BYU ended up outshooting Arizona 13-5 in this one, 9 shots on target. But the quality of those shots wasn't always there. The quality was there on their one goal. We should give a shout out to Erin Bailey, I think, for this goal where she just kind of got into the box and Ali Fryer delivers up a little service. Bailey's in the right place at the right time, and she's able to nod home her first goal in what's felt like a billion matches, or at least I know for a fact from her perspective, it's felt like a billion matches. She's been struggling with a little bit of an injury suffered in that Arkansas game, she's coming back. I thought she looked good. She looked quality on the ball at times, very deserving of that goal in her 47 minutes off the bench as she works her way back into the rotation for Jen Rockwood's side. What did you make of that goal, that service, kind of that moment for her?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think as a forward, the most stressful thing is going games and games without goals, because you feel like that's kind of your job. You have one job, and that is to try to score goals. And as a forward, and I know for Erin Bailey, that can be really frustrating to feel like you're going game after game where you're not getting goals. And granted, you had mentioned it that she's been dealing with injuries. She had part of the season where she was sick. And so, she's had some extenuating circumstances that I think have affected that. But you imagine that does feel good. And you give her credit for being in the right place at the right time. I think that's how you described it. And I think that's an accurate description. Sometimes as a forward, you just have to get that first goal. So I know Erin Bailey is the type of player that likes to create her own goals. She's the kind that she likes to get the ball and take players on 1v1 and try to get her own shot, which is awesome and great. But sometimes you give forwards credit for just knowing where the ball is going to be, making the open run so that when they receive it, they're inside and they can get a good shot off. And it's worth just as much as the ones you create your own, yourself. So I think that's good for her to be able to get that under her belt and know, okay, I'm back. I'm getting back into the routine of things. And then from there, she can start creating her own stuff again.
Yeah, we sometimes have a bad habit of characterizing certain goals that forwards score as poachers goals, Chris Wondolowski type of goals for MLS fans, old school MLS fans, I guess. But those types of goals, I think, are pretty important. And I think EB has this ability, and an even greater ability than she gets credit for, and I think even that she gives herself credit for, of being able to be in the right space, right place at the right time, making runs, whether it's towards the back post off of a rebound or just collecting herself in the middle of the box, kind of waiting for a spillover, that kind of thing. Like those types of goals, those types of situations are very valid in the game. And I think she has an ability to collect on those goals. It's just a matter of putting her in those positions, and sometimes even her putting herself in those positions to be able to collect those markers in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
I was really happy to
yeah.
see not just this goal, but the way it happened in that way.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. A goal is a goal is a goal. And if you were to ask any coach, if you were to tell them, you're going to score 100 goals this season, but they'll all just be kind of like in the right place, poacher goals, they'd still take it, right? It's still necessary to put your team on top. They say the same thing about players who receive a lot of like penalty kicks. They'll say the same thing like, oh yeah, they scored a bunch of goals this season, but half of them were off penalty kicks that they were fouled for. And it's almost like a discredit. And it's like, no, someone who is able to get inside the box and be in the right place at the right time, or someone who's able to get inside the box and draw a foul, draw a penalty kick, like that is just as valuable as someone who can create their own goals, because in the end, it's just a wider array and diversity of the type of goals that you can score.
Yeah, and to have that trust and that credit from the team, I think, to be the primary penalty kick taker. We don't need to diverge too much into that, but I think that's also a skill, and that speaks a lot to the value of a player on a team. So
Yeah. You just want diversity in your style of play, is I guess the main point. And Erin Bailey scoring that goal just showed a bit more diversity on her end and how she plays and what she brings to the table. And so, yeah, I was happy for her, and I imagine that feels good for her to be able to get that goal. Obviously, the team didn't get the final result that they wanted, but there are little glimpses, Sean, throughout this whole season. I know this is a building year for BYU. I know they're not as ranked as high as they have been in past years, but you do see glimpses of like a team that's going to be really, really good in the future.
yeah, you see, I think it's easy to see moments of this team like this year reminds me a little bit of I think it was about 3 years ago with BYU women's soccer, where they were just coming off of, once again, like a run to the College Cup, their first one ever, and they were riding high and all of that, and they lost a couple of pieces, and they were kind of trying to figure out in some ways. They took some, I would say probably even more just straight up hard done results on the chin that year, but you could see them putting the pieces together to build a little bit more brick by brick, piece by piece, and it led to last season's run once again to the NCAA College Cup. So sometimes you got to go through that, and I think there are moments, like you were saying, Carla, where this team is showing its quality and showing that it's got the ability to be pretty good in there. So
Yeah.
BYU falls 2-1 to the University of Arizona last Friday. That's the first of 3 straight matches on the road. They're going to be doing the Sunflower State swing, as I like to call it here. They're Thursday evening at Rock Chalk Park in Lawrence, Kansas, to face the University of Kansas, and then Monday 6 p.m. Mountain Time in Manhattan at Bucer Family Park to face Kansas State. You can catch both of those games on Big 12 Now on ESPN Plus, as you can all of these conference games, including most of the home games, where my co-host Carla Swensen-Haslam has been doing a great job of calling these matchups. So as we look ahead to BYU finishing off this road trip, their penultimate road trip of the season, their tied technically for the longest road trip of the year, 3 straight matches on the road. What are you looking for this team to kind of move forward and maybe put, let's just use that same terminology, kind of stack another brick, stack another moment. What are you looking for from this team as they head to Kansas and K-State?
Yeah, I want to see them play a bit more consistently because they've done this before. If you remember at the very beginning of the season, they had a 3 road game streak where they went to St. Louis, they went to Long Beach, and they went to UCLA. And even though they weren't able to get wins out of those games, they ended up resulting in draws. BYU was pretty consistent for the most part. And I think that was really helpful to have that long 3-game road streak because now BYU is going against that same 3-game road streak far away later in conference play. And so my hope is now that they can learn from that and say, okay, we've done this before. How do we play more consistent? Because I think that's why they didn't get the wins. They were pretty consistent, I would say. I don't think it was a bad showing. And obviously they played very talented teams at the beginning of the season. But they probably could have won some of those games had they just played a bit more consistently on the road. And so I think that's what I'm looking for from these next 3 games is, okay, you've had that experience. You've learned from it now. I remember speaking with Coach Rockwood last week, and one of the things she told me is that we're not a new team anymore. We're almost to the end of the season. Like we're no longer just like figuring things out and trying to find things. We are now deep into the season. And so we need to start playing that way. So I think that's what I'd like to see. Obviously, you want wins, and especially as you're, getting down into the seeding for the conference tournament at the end of the year, you need wins, you need goals, no doubt. But I want to see this team just play consistently. I want to see them go 90 minutes of consistently good soccer, and that doesn't mean you don't give up goals or you don't give up counters, but can you like go long stretches where you're playing consistently well and holding pretty steady? And I think if the team can do that on the road for these 3 games, I think they're going to be just fine.
Yeah, and I think there's a great opportunity here with the back end of this 3-game road trip. You've got 2 teams in Kansas and Kansas
Yeah,
State that
they're
are
winnable. Those are
yeah,
winnable games.
yeah, that are absolutely winnable. I mean, they're both teams that are rated behind that are currently behind, I should say, BYU in the Big 12 standings, and you need points. Dropped a couple. We mentioned it at the top a little bit. Dropped a couple at home to Oklahoma State. I don't think that's a bad draw necessarily by any means, but you do need to make up for those dropped 2 points somewhere. And I think this weekend is an opportunity to do that with KU and K-State, 2 teams that historically, Carla, this BYU team has been very good against. The Cougars and Jayhawks have faced 5 times previously, with BYU leading the all-time series 4-1. The last time the 2 teams met was 2019 when the Cougars beat the then number 14 Kansas side 2-0 at Rock Chalk Park. BYU's won its last 3 meetings with Kansas going back to the 2007 season. So some historical significance there a little bit against a team that you've enjoyed a decent amount of success, even if that success hasn't come, obviously in the tenure of any of these players, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's important to look at. And you're right, just the fact that this may be an opportunity for BYU to bounce back after, a rough loss against the Wildcats and just keep working on that seeding for the tournament. Like seeding is everything. Seeding makes such a big difference. And so if that's their focus is how do we start preparing, for conference tournament play, like this is the moment. The moment is now. You can't wait.
Yeah, 100%. Likewise, BYU's 2-0 all time against Kansas State, including last year's 2-0 win at Southfield. You remember Ali Fryer had a goal in that one. I believe that was the Big 12 opener on Southfield, if my memory serves. I think that's the conference opener as well. So two teams that you've enjoyed some significant success against. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So that match against Kansas, once again, this Thursday, October 10th at 5 p.m. at Rock Chalk Park. You can catch that on ESPN Plus. And then BYU will turn around and head to Manhattan for a Monday evening match. That's October 14th at 6 p.m. Buser Family Park. And once again, Big 12 now on ESPN Plus. That's where you can catch all the games for the rest of this year, especially as we head down the final stretch of the season. Carla, let's take a quick minute before we get out of here. There are, I'm trying to do real quick math here, count them up, but 5 matches left in the regular season. I think you touched on it a little bit with your road trip commentary, but what's the biggest goal for the last 5 games of the regular season here for BYU soccer before it heads to, or hopefully books a spot in the Big 12 Women's Soccer Championships at CPKC Stadium in Kansas City the final week of October?
Yeah, I think BYU should be trying to win out. I think it's doable. Obviously, they're going to be playing some talented teams, but I think it's doable. The games where I was a bit more uncertain about how BYU would do have since passed. And we were actually correct in our predictions of how those games would go. But I look at these next 5 games, and I think BYU can and could win out. I don't think it would be enough to put them at the number 1 seed, but it would be enough to, again, get them good seeding for the tournament. And then, it sounds cliche, but the goal is to always peak at tournament time, peak at conference play. And that's something that's new for BYU. In the West Coast Conference, there was no tournament. It was just whoever ended the season number 1. And so that's something that BYU, I think, needs to mentally start preparing for now, and they probably already have, is knowing that they're going to be playing a tournament at the end of the season before the NCAA tournament even gets into seeding and rankings and and all their, RPI algorithms. And so I think BYU can use these 3 road games, as opportunities to prepare for the tournament, because you're on the road and you're going to be playing so many of these same teams again. So you already recognize so many of the players and how they play and their styles of play. And I would just look at this as opportunities to prepare for that tournament now. That is now the goal. It is no longer preparing our team to, find our lineups or find who we are, but now all focus should just be on the conference tournament and we can use these next 5 games to really solidify ourselves for that conference play.
Yeah, it's time to look at just simply getting the results. In the immortal words of the late great Al Davis, former Las Vegas Raiders owner, just win, baby, right? It's time to just kind of focus on results. I think this BYU team, for the most part, is what it is at this point. It's you know who they are, you know what the system is. Now it's just about going on and executing and getting the result.
That's exactly it. I don't think the team is going to make any massive improvements in the next month. So take what you have now, which I think is a talented team. Take what you have now, and how do we just, you're right, solidify that and focus entirely on using what you have right now for conference play rather than trying to change too many things up.
100%. Great stuff, as always, from Carla Swensen-Haslam. You can catch her on ESPN Plus. Every home call, I should say, of the BYU women's soccer team this season. They got 2 more home matches, October 17th at 7 p.m. against Baylor, and then senior night, I guess it'll be Monday, October 21st at 7 p.m. against Houston. Both of those very winnable games, as are, I think, these next 2 games on the road at KU and at Kansas State, leading up to that regular season finale Friday, October 25th at Texas Tech. I think that's probably the toughest game left on the season. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say that the Red Raiders do currently, they're tied for the lead in the conference at 5-0-1 in league play, which honestly is not something I thought I would say. For my co-host, Carla Swensen-Haslam, thank you once again for joining me. This has been another edition of the Rock and Royal Soccer Show, saying good night and see you on the pitch.
granting kids wishes like that boy Cosmo.
I got you.
They steady hating on us, but we who they watch though.
Who that?
The Pac-12 mad, but we still on top, bro.
Y'all down low.
Jaren Holder, Cody X, that's a cool connect.
Yeah, my team is kinda old, but it's cool, we vets.
I'm hitting too hard, ow, I hurt my neck.
Hey, Leak, you good, bro? I'm about to hit up Brett.
Man, them Utah State Aggies, man, they just some pets.
Catch us out in Vegas, you could place your bet.
Coach G up on our side, so we never pressed.
Praying meetings every day, so we never stress. Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy. Know you with me, let's get it, baby. Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy.